like to introduce our next speaker, James Kavanagh. James is the director of the RICS Land Group and chair of the ILMS Coalition. He is a chartered land surveyor and a chartered geographer with over 25 years of experience in civil engineering, land issues, and surveying. He has worked on some of the largest civil engineering projects in Europe and spent several years mapping Palestinian refugee camps in the Middle East while working for the United Nations. Today, James is going to speak to us about harnessing solutions for land-related challenges. Welcome, James. The floor is yours.
Hi, Claire. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. My mother would be very proud.
Are you sharing slides today, James?
I am. Can you see them? I've just started sharing.
Oh, there we go. Beautiful. Thank you very much. You're good to go.
Thanks a million, and thanks for the invite. I really am honoured to speak to all of you young surveyors. I think, you know, you're absolutely critical to the future of the profession, and I think it's incumbent on those of us with a few years of experience to try and talk to you a bit about what we've experienced ourselves in our careers and how we've seen our profession change, and in some ways not change, over the last few decades. I think the great thing about us surveyors is that a lot of what we do is global. You know, what many of you will learn in university in Nairobi will be the same as I learned in university in Dublin, or somebody else learns in Moscow, or somebody in Buenos Aires. It's a very global profession, and one that that we're very proud of, and one that's incredibly important. And what I'm going to do in this presentation, I will rattle through a few things, is try and introduce you to a few other concepts, maybe outside of the geospatial end of things a little bit. So, you know, a bit more into land tenure and land tenure security and its centrality within land acquisition and land valuation. And that's something that we've been working a lot with the UN, with FIG and the World Bank over the last number of years, particularly on this unregistered land reporting operational manual that we've done with UN GLTN over the last few months. And I'll work my way through that. I'm a land surveyor as well, like many of you, just to show you when it comes to the valuation end of things, how close it is to what we already do. And with a bit of upgrading of, I think, skill sets, that should be something that we should be able to take on ourselves in conjunction with a more broadly rounded professional kind of mentality. Okay, let me try and get my slides working. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so that was a bit of an introduction on what I'm going to talk about, a bit more about land registration, acquisition. I'll also mention ethics. I've been really interested to listen to many of the talks this morning. You know, I think there's been some incredible insight, and you know, I was very interested to see the insight, say, on development of soft skills that one of our colleagues mentioned earlier, and also what Claire mentioned a bit earlier about how lucky we are, particularly in the global north, where and I'm including New Zealand and Australia in that. You know, where we can rely on tenure security information and really as a basis for a lot of economic development that perhaps we're not aware of. So on this slide, I've thrown up that classic quote by De Soto from the famous book, Mystery of Capital, which is a must read for any of you who are interested in economic geography and how what we do within surveying kind of links into the global financial system that are in place at the moment across all of our economies, no matter whether we like it or not. And then also another quote about, you know, not only is it financial, but land, unlike many other types of investments, are deeply, deeply and intrinsically bonded to people's identities and existence. And that's the same in every part of the world. If you take somebody's farm off them for a large-scale infrastructure project in Ireland, where I'm from, it's just as brutal and just as emotional and just as potentially conflict-ridden as any other part of the world. So the surveyor's role within that, you know, as that kind of not only understanding land and the people and also the information around it is an absolutely key critical skill set that is something that we need to continue to develop. Land acquisition and compensation processes around the world are enormously conflict-ridden. There's I won't go into the stats too much, but there's currently like over 700 live disputes in India, holding up $200 billion in investment into infrastructure. You know, these are the conflicts that start wars, as we all know. And also people within the context of having unregistered land or tenure difficulties or tenure insecurity are particularly at risk when it comes to land acquisition and compensation. I, like many of you, was probably watching the COP26 reports coming from Glasgow just a month ago, and one of the things that we were very interested in was you know, the amount of money through the GFANZ project, trillions of dollars flowing into natural-based climate solutions, i.e. land-based climate solutions, and the potential pressure this will put on indigenous peoples' lands, communal lands, unregistered lands in general, you know, from acquisition and potentially, you know, difficult compensation issues. So this is a live problem globally. And, you know, as we know, as good surveyors, we don't map for a laugh. We don't collect information just because we have to. We do it because somebody wants to do something with it. People either want to secure their rights, people want to buy, sell, tax, use as an asset during a loan application in the dispute process, etc. So, you know, the information that we're collecting, as you heard from Trimble just a while ago, is in the last talk, is really quite critical. Of course, the globe has different legal systems, and on the top of these different legal systems are overlaid our land systems, you know, deeds registration, land books, and title registration, and a mix of them in different parts of the world. Like Claire said, I've been lucky to work in many parts of the world that have very, very different concepts of land registration and communal property rights. And that was quite an eye-opener coming from a country with individualized land rights enshrined in law and legally enforceable. Because what we're really trying to do in many parts of the world is move from systems like this, and this is the case still in the UK. 20% of the UK landmass is still unregistered. It doesn't mean nobody owns it, but the information is held in deeds like this. And in many parts of the world, as you know, it's already worse, you know, with a lot of this information being destroyed or being degraded over many, many years, certainly since the process of decolonialization, which is something, certainly from a land point of view, many countries are really still grappling with. You know, we want to move towards a more coherent, GIS-driven, efficient land administration system. But, you know, land administration comes in, land administration comes in many different aspects, and there's many different rules and protocols that we need to think about as surveyors. It's not just about measuring stuff physically, you know, from a geodetic or geospatial point of view, important as that is. You know, there are other higher goals in a way, such as the sustainable development goals. And I mentioned the amount of money that's going to flow towards land-based solutions, and also the amount of finance and pressure on land at the moment, either from an infrastructural point of view or from a compensatory point of view. And one of the most important documents that we all use within the land sectors, and which we helped develop over the last 10 years, is the voluntary guidelines. This is our North Star for all of us within the land sectors, whether we're geospatial specialists, whether we're GIS specialists, whether we're land admin specialists, or whether we're land valuation experts and specialists. You know, the contents of this is signed up to by every country in the world, and many nations will have, of course, land legislation on their books, you know, and land acquisition information on their books, but doesn't necessarily mean that they adhere to it. I won't go into the RICS one at the moment. But, you know, that UNFAO voluntary guidelines is part of a broad kind of a portfolio of information right across the board, something that we've been developing within RICS, but also with FIG and their colleagues in the IVSC, the International Valuation Standards Council, and of course UNGLTN and wider UN Habitat. So, you know, all that information around creating a system to record tenure rights and first registration, you know, real estate registration cadastre, which I'll speak about in a moment, and our evaluation of unregistered land work, along with the international land reporting system, are, you know, all part of this portfolio of intellectual output. Because to tell you the truth now, you know, unregistered land, people don't really want to talk about it, and because it's not on the books, You know, it doesn't appear in any kind of financial reporting system. It's not taxable. It's difficult to establish rights. It's difficult to establish ownership. And when we think about, you know, issues of, say, value and valuation issues, tenure security is the largest variable within a large, you know, a group of variables within a large solution or equation. And that's what causes massive differentials in price variations over people's land, and a difficulty for people understanding how much their own land is worth. We've just released a piece on real estate registration in conjunction with the World Bank and UNFAO. And now this was dealt with by some experts, colleagues of ours who've worked, you know, in countries that were in transition, particularly in the 1990s and the noughties, where the Soviet Union collapsed, and many countries moved from a command economy to a capitalist economy overnight, and much of that was driven by the establishment of private ownership of property. So tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of parcels all across the stands of Central Asia. In this, the quote up there now, Kyrgyzstan, for instance, but from Armenia right the way across that part of Central Europe and Central Asia. A huge amount of work has been done in this sector. What this output does is look at the realities, the operational realities of what works in reality. I heard somebody earlier mention corruption as being the most common problem to be resolved. That's absolutely true. You know, corruption and governance are the two key things that really kind of have an enormous effect on what we do within these areas, and also around capacity issues as well. You guys and girls, you young surveyors, you know, you're a rare breed these days. We need tens of thousands more. You know, we need broadly educated professionals. We need general practice surveyors rather than, I would suggest, kind of over-specialized experts in many areas. We need people with a broad understanding of land and geospatial and mapping systems and land tenure and valuation and planning and environment and everything else that goes with that land portfolio, as it were. So we're actually doing an event on this next week, which is freely available, and I'll send you some information afterwards on how you could possibly sign up and have a listen in to some of these experts from World Bank and UNFAO. Because that significance of the cadastre it's incredibly significant, as we know, but that aspect of value, you know, along with tenure security, can sometimes be forgotten within the overall system. Ethical principles are starting to be developed within geospatial, incredibly important, particularly when we speak about, you know, people's rights and people's tenure security rights and the value attached to those. This is the some of the founding principles of the Locust Charter. Ethical Geo signed up to the American surveyors, ourselves and the RICS, numerous GIS organizations particularly, and the data ethics end of things within land and property as well. Because, you know, these codes of conduct and how we practice in reality are incredibly important. So what I would say to you, young surveyors, is that your national professional bodies are very, very important. You know, you need to put effort into either joining them or trying to join them students or helping to drive the way that they, you know, work and practice. FIG have a code of conduct for surveyors. RICS, we've just developed a new code of conduct. And of course, all national bodies have codes of conduct. This is where ethical practice hits operational practice. So what you're doing in the field. We work in an area within land transfer, land data acquisition that has potential for corruption. We all know that. You know, so it's important that surveyors working in those areas understand their ethical responsibilities and adhere to codes of conduct. Otherwise, you know, many of us professional bodies will have regulatory processes in place to take people to task when they act a bit, you know, naughty, as it were, or even worse in many cases. So international standards, we're working together, you know, surrounded by ethics. IFRS, the International Finance Reporting Standards, and ILMS. I'll just speak a bit about ILMS now, the International Land Reporting Standard. We heard from Trimble there about, you know, that information that's captured within the context of a parcel. The parcel is the ultimate kind of building block, really, of land administration. So, you know, each individualized parcel, how it's captured, the information around it, not only, you know, that hard mapping geospatial coordinated information based on good GNSS and whatever geodetic systems are in place within country, and also its connectivity to national mapping, is and land registration. That non-hard information around people, around legal entities, around value, around proximity to assets, etc., all has a significant level of importance. This is the bones, I suppose, of ILMS, which is its worksheet. We've been talking to Esri, for instance, about putting this into an easy-to-use kind of, what you call a smartphone kind of application. So land tenure, its risks, of course, which is what everybody's interested in, really. You know, whether things are risky or not, parcel identification, land area, land use and services, also buildings and land valuation, and sustainability. This was something we stuck in about 3 or 4 years ago. You know, and I think that's going to become incredibly important within the context of how we move forward on climate change issues, on natural capital issues, on ecosystem services issues, you know, and those kind of non-market value issues, which are becoming post COP26 even more and more important in the eyes not only of policymakers but of people themselves. Okay. I'll skip through that a bit more. We've put ILMS out in a variety of different languages, including Arabic and French, German, Spanish, even Irish, and onto the board. That was the Irish surveyors wanted to do that, you know, and Turkish. So that was the great thing about having an international coalition, was us all working together across numerous boundaries from numerous different professional bodies with numerous different kind of insights into how things work in a land reporting capacity. But just into valuation quickly for some of you. When I studied to be a surveyor in the late 1980s in Dublin, our courses were quite, how can I put this, general practice orientated. So even though there was a concentration on the traditional land surveyor elements of measurement, of course, and mapping and instrument use, etc., even hydrographic survey, you know, we also did modules on valuation and planning, and legal processes, as you still do, I'm sure, and governance. And I know that's fallen away in many cases within many courses, which is not so good in many ways. But to give you an introduction back into evaluation itself, you know, it's not brain surgery. There's no reason that land surveyors cannot engage in this and at least understand the principles, particularly when you are out there in the field collecting really, you know, important, critical information about land parcels and about people's tenure security. So just talking a bit about the manual at the moment, which is operational. We will be developing a MOOC with the UN in the new year on this, but really this is the key to understanding valuation. This general principle, the principle of market value. So market value is the estimated amount for which an asset or liability should exchange on the valuation date, willing buyer, willing seller, arm's length transaction, proper marketing, blah, 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 parties acted knowledgeably, prudently, and without compulsion. That really is the heart of valuation, enshrined within the International Valuation Standard 21. And, you know, everything else kind of flows from that when we think about it, you know, about how communities obtain benefits from their legitimate rights and their legalizable rights, of course, over land, including the right to fish, livestock, use of factory rights, communal rights, everything else that goes with that. You know, they all fall within this context of potential value, market value, or an extension of that into non-market value, you know, which is where things are really starting to develop. Because during the development of this manual, we reached out beyond the valuation sector, to us, surveyors, you know, but also to others, to economists, to planners, to governance and legal experts, to anthropologists. You know, there's a great organization called NAMATE that work in the legal end of things within land tenure and land security, but also very active in helping people understand have a basic knowledge of the value of their property, which is incredibly powerful, you know. And people in unregistered situations usually grossly undervalue their land and their land rights, because it is the value of the land rights that has been put down on paper. You know, they may not understand how valuable it is. They may only see it as a direct, you know, service style industry. How much do I get? How much can I sell, for instance, without understanding those deeper non-transferable rights, you know, that the UN and the World Bank are very, very concerned about these days, such as social value, spiritual value, cultural value, you know, and of course, ecosystem and natural value, which are becoming incredibly important. And the valuation profession is still very much in its infancy of trying to understand how these things work. So there's three major elements to valuation, three major methodologies and sub-methodologies within that, of course. The comparison approach, which is the one that we use globally. So you base it on available information from other sales or other use. The income approach, the more bespoke type of valuation, hotels, shopping malls, etc., dealing with economic income. And then the cost approach, so the cost ultimately of replacing that property. And in the end, and when you're in a data poor society, which is most of the global south, particularly on valuation information, people tend to use a mix match of some, you know, where they will use, say, an inappropriate valuation methodology, such as the cost approach to value residential property within cities, for instance, or land or squatter information, for instance, because, you know, it has a knockover into the broader economy. And that's something to kind of realize, because, you know, this is not an esoteric subject. This affects people's lives, as do what you do, you know. So I just looked this up yesterday, because I had one from a couple of years ago where Malawi was had the highest mortgage interest rate in Africa of over 30%. That's now gone down to 20. But, you know, those rates are astronomical. People cannot engage in a modern legal economy when they're being charged those kind of interest rates on legal loans. So that pushes people towards loan sharks, that pushes people into the black economy, that pushes people basically into more poverty, and ultimately, you know, leads to, I suppose, a danger of them undermining their own asset, you know, by putting it up as collateral when it doesn't particularly kind of warrant that. And that's another thing about unregistered land and value. You know, that issue of tenure security is critically important in the context of valuation, because it decides on what you can use it for. Can you dispose of it, i.e. sell? Can you use it for collateral? Can you subdivide it? Can you rent it? Can you improve it? So, you know, that issue of tenure security is very, very important. And also, I think equally important is understanding how the UN and the World Bank view these things slightly differently. The World Bank is totally orientated towards GDP, whether we like it or not, and an increase in economic activity. The United Nations is orientated towards land tenure as a human right and the provision of shelter for people. So there's a slight kind of mismatch there sometimes, where the World Bank, you know, will think about tenure security and the compensation scenario as, you know, the three levels really: fully legally recognizable rights, legalizable rights, you know, like new legislation coming in, but it hasn't been done yet, which is, I think, what a lot of you guys and girls are going to be involved in. And then squatter rights, not legal and not legitimate, but still, you know, have compensation potentially attached to the removal of their rights. Because when we come to compensation, you know, the equivalence principle, where somebody, which again, back to the voluntary guidelines, somebody should not be left worse off than they were before the acquisition process took place. And you as surveyors are right in the heart of the storm of how this works. So the gathering of that information on people's tenure security is critically important. Some of you may remember the what you call a continuum of land rights, and it's the same with the valuation end of things. And just going through these steps quickly, you can see where you as land surveyors are already doing a lot of this work. You know, a valuer will be required to identify the unregistered land and property rights. You've just been speaking about that. Collect land and property information, you know, like Marcus from Trimble has spoken about. Determine the existence of a market. I think if you've got half a brain in your head, you should be able to determine whether there's a market in existence. Like Claire mentioned, I worked in refugee camps. There are markets within refugee camps. People have bigger families, you know, they have kids, they want to be closer to a health center, they want to be closer to a school, an amenity, a job, etc. People move everywhere. Markets have existed long before humanity decided on any of our isms that we've put around these things. We've been buying and selling property for millennia. So then quantify the market value and deal with those risks, like I mentioned, about tenure insecurity, communal rights, whether it's actually legalizable, you know, in the context, whether there's legislation coming or governance is in place, and issues of corruption. And then the other issues of non-market value and the non-market, the recognition of that non-market value, which is the thing that is disrupting the valuation profession at the moment, because we're not used to that really. So I won't go through every one of the different issues because I know we're tight on time. I'm looking for my phone because I know Claire will be sending messages on the WhatsApp thing. And hang on a second, let me get into that.
Now you're off the hook.
Am I off the hook? Where am I? All right, I'm all good.
I think you've got a minute.
I've got a minute, right? So all of these slides will be available to you afterwards, but what I would ask you to do afterwards is just look through these different steps and see where you, as a surveyor, already do this. You know, and I think you will see that there's a lot that you already do, and with a bit of upskilling, particularly around terminology, around how value and economics work, there's much more that you can add when you're gathering this kind of information, because value is directly connected to tenure security. Absolutely, it's absolutely at the heart of tenure security, and vice versa. And allowing people to understand how their land is valued is absolutely key to understanding tenure security. You know, say for instance, when we talk about a hierarchy of information in a land dispute, you know, all the way from title, but you know, just as important as an affidavit from a neighbor saying that you've always lived there, an electricity bill for a property, or even more powerful, a tax certificate. Because, you know, who doesn't pay tax? That's right, criminals. So, you know, people have a different range of information that could be used in dispute context. And I think that's always kind of freaked many surveyors out a bit. Yeah. So we have different templates in the document, including one from Namate that allows you, for instance, to use in the field. I would encourage you to do this, to look at how you would help customary landowners determine the value of their land. Yeah, this is quite basic stuff. And the same with the templates on the valuation of unregistered land rights itself. It's a nice, brutally simple piece of work. So, a few conclusions. Unregistered land, communal individuals, incredibly important and needs to be recorded appropriately. You're at the absolute center of this. You have to be holistic in land reporting. It's not just about geospatial information. That's the wallpaper that we hang everything else on, particularly this kind of social and economic information. Yeah. Relearn traditional skill sets of a surveyor. 100 years ago, we were general practice. Don't become overskilled and go down the geospatial rabbit hole too much. I would suggest we're part of a much more holistic profession. We're people. Surveyors deal with people. You've already heard that earlier in earlier talks. You know, we're proposing value juries, speaking to people about how they develop their land, how they understand their land, how they value their land, how they use their land. So that development of those softer skills of empathy and mediation are absolutely key along with those hard kind of programming tech skills. Collect as much information as you can. You'll be surprised how useful this will be in the future. Absolutely collect everything. There's some next steps there, and also then some key resources. And I'll put up at the end. There's all of my details. And just in case you thought that you were being harangued by some mad old Irish surveyor for the last half an hour, there's a picture of me as a younger surveyor. Well, when I would have got into your gang there with a nice head of black curly hair, working in the Middle East, in this place in Jabalia camp in Gaza, along with kids all over my instrumentation, of course, as usual. So I know how important it is as young surveyors, and how important it is to get that experience, either volunteering or in some kind of difficult working environment. So my hat off to you, and thanks for listening.
Thank you so much, James, for the very beautiful presentation, quite informative. And then you've taken us, I think, back into land valuation and the likes again. Thank you so much for this presentation. I understand that there are going to be questions, and I think I can see some questions on the chat box as well while the presentation was going on. Okay. I think I'm sorry, please. I think these questions are not particular with this ongoing presentation. I think the questions are from other presentations we've had. So at this point, do we have anyone with any question for James before we step into the next thing, which of course is the closing for this meeting. Okay, if there are questions, you can put them in the chat box. While the closing is ongoing, we can ask James to respond to some of those questions. For me personally, I want to appreciate everybody for being part of this workshop. I mean, everybody who started with us and are still with us at this point. Thank you so much. Started from the opening from our Vice President Diane, and then proceeded into the expert sessions, and then we had panel discussions, we had breakout sessions, and then we're back again together. So thank you for going through with us in this journey. And then we hope that you've had a remarkable workshop. So a little announcement concerning the MOOC. It is important that we all finish up with what we're doing in the MOOC class before the next 48 hours, which I think should be around 32 hours now. And you can just get back to the classroom and then look at the deadline and make sure it works with you, with your time zone, and then turn in the assignments that are important. Thank you very, very much.